Live. All right. I'm pretty sure we're live. Excellent. All right. So if anybody is watching us right now, please just let me know that you're watching and I'll be able to make sure everything's working properly and the sound is working well and everything's happy and going great. Just going to wait a few seconds as people join. I can see there are 2 people watching. That's awesome. All right. So today I'm going to be talking about photography stuff. I'm going to let people join for a couple seconds. If I can get some feedback. Anne is watching. Sweet Anne, hello. Is the sound working okay? Does everything look okay? And is everything flowing, Anne? Just make sure before I start into the conversation a little bit more involved. Sound is great today. Spectacular. Robin's watching. Awesome. Cool. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much. I'm Bryan Weiss. I'm an employee here at Henry's Newmarket in, Henry's Camera in Newmarket. I'm doing this weekly web show for a lot of reasons. First off, to help our community, stay involved in photography and get to enjoy this world of photography a little bit more. But I'm doing this from Henry's specifically because, well, A, they let me, so thank you, Henry's. But B, because it gives me an opportunity to talk about a lot of really good gear and to talk about some of the promotions and things that we have going on. Because if you don't know already, Henry's is a hub for photography community people. If you love photography, you have questions, come and ask. So that is a big reason why I'm so happy Henry's is letting me do this here in the store. If you have any questions, if there's anything you want to bring up in conversation, please go ahead and post it in the chat. If I don't see the post, I believe Juan is watching as well, and he'll be able to draw it to my attention. So please feel free to keep in touch and be a part of this conversation. I'm going to quickly say hi to people who've already said hi to me, which is awesome. Robin, Ann, of course. Jerry, hello. Mike Garrity. Everything's great. Juan, thank you, sir, for watching. All right, let's start this off with the DigiKnow. A DigiKnow is a little quick digital know-how segment. Did you know about something? Try not to keep it for a long period of time, just keep it nice and quick. So today's conversation is going to be talking about firmware. I'm not sure if you know what firmware is or if you've had to update firmware in the past, but firmware is a form of microcode or a program embedded into hardware devices to help them operate effectively. Meaning every time there's new firmware for your camera, they'll release a patch for your camera and you download it and you update your camera with that new firmware and you're teaching it new tricks. You can do a lot of things with firmware. Sometimes there are problems when a camera is released right from the manufacturer that they fix with firmware. Sometimes they add entirely new features. So what we're going to talk about today is what is firmware and how do you do that kind of stuff. First off, firmware on cameras. It can help with focusing. It can help with new toys. Actually, Robin was in earlier today, and we were talking about some of the things that firmware does. And one of those things is it teaches a camera bird eye detection in some cases. So if all of a sudden they create this new technology for your camera that can actually see a bird's eye, your firmware will teach that camera the new trick. But firmware isn't only limited to cameras. Actually, a lot of lenses now have a firmware capability, which you can actually program the lens to focus a bit quicker or a bit slower. You can micro adjust where your focus is supposed to be. So if I'm focusing on somebody's eye, but the tip of their nose in the photo is actually in focus, I can micro adjust that distance back through firmware or through, the programming capabilities of a lens. Sigma has this really cool USB dock. Tamron also has a very similar system. We just don't have a funky little display for it. Essentially, you just plug this into USB on your computer, put your lens to it, and it will update firmware on your lens, teaching it new tricks. So bodies, lenses, but also things like your flash. A lot of flashes have to learn new firmware. There's an example of the new Nikon firmware for their Z9 camera, 5.0 I believe it is. It prevents any aftermarket brand flash working aside from Photix, Profoto, and of course the Nikon branded flash. So if you have a Godox or a different brand, you might have to load the firmware into your transmitters and receivers for those to be able to fire that signal effectively from this new firmware on the camera. So the camera learned a new trick, which then had to in turn teach all your electronics a new trick. A lot of these things, you'll pay attention to them these days. They'll have a little USB port. If they have a USB port, most likely that's for updating firmware or just charging your battery. It all depends on what you're doing. So that's the DigiKnow. Firmware is super important. Not everybody needs to worry about it. My recommendation for firmware is if you see there's a new update on firmware, review online first what it actually does. What's the benefit of that firmware for you? If there isn't one, don't bother with the firmware right away. Just let it roll. If you feel that you have to do it because your software isn't compatible with your camera raw or something is a little bit off, then you can do it. If you have any trouble, you can always revert back to the previous firmware. And that's all how you would go. Oh, by the way, how you do this. A lot of cases, what you have to do is you have to take your memory card out of the camera, pop it in a card reader, clear that memory card completely. Then you would load that software to the card. You put the card back in your camera, you go to your firmware option on your menu, and it'll give you a new little option, which is update. You hit the button, put the camera down, and don't touch it, don't move it, don't even breathe on it, and let it just do its thing. Make sure you have a fully charged battery when you start that process. Some cameras, like the new Z8 Nikon or Z9 and some of the Sonys, you can actually update the firmware through its app. Nikon's app is called SnapBridge. You go to the app, you pair your camera to it, and you'll have a little notification right on the app that says you've got new firmware. Click the button, and it takes care of it for you. That's the way it's starting to go. Hopefully all cameras will work that way eventually, but it's still a thing that you have to be paying attention to. All right, let's get into the what's new and used section of our conversation. Before I do that, let me just see. Robin says, true, I had the firmware updated on a Tamron lens so that it would work with the FTZ adapter. Exactly. So Nikon new mirrorless cameras have an adapter from the F mount to the Z mount. This is F mount now, mirrorless is Z mount. The F2Z adapter, you had to do an update so that the Tamron lens, or you had to update the lens so that the whole system would work together more effectively. When that lens was first brought out, the Z system wasn't available. So when the system became available, they had to teach lenses new tricks, and that's where firmware can come in. Awesome. Thank you, Robin, for that little tidbit. That helps a lot. All right. Bye. Aurora, our store manager, is leaving again. All right, let's keep going here. We're going to get into the new and used now. I'm just going to back up my little teleprompter. I'm using a teleprompter for the first time, in case you notice me going to my phone here. It's kind of fun, although it's something to get used to. All right, so during this segment, I'm going to be talking about something that's new and used in the photography industry. It doesn't always have to be new gear. It could be, or used gear even. It could be just something that we use, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. First, I'm going to show you this really cool lens that Sony is just bringing out. This is the new Sony 16 to 25 f2.8 lens. This is what's new. It's an ultra compact 2.8 aperture ultra wide lens for a Sony full frame camera system. This is something that's just been announced. We don't have these in store yet, obviously, but it's something I'm excited to see come through the store because a lot of people like bright lenses. A lot of people are shooting for shallow depth of field, or they're working in a concert environment, or in my world, shooting pro wrestling. A 16 to 25 would be amazing for doing what I do. You'd have really, really wide shots. And at a 2.8 aperture, it lets in tons of light. So a lens like this that's lightweight, compact, and very bright is something to really look forward to. I don't have a price on this guy yet, but it's an option for some people that are getting into the Sony and they have a full frame, an FE mount. Yeah, Robin, it is a pretty cool lens. That's why I'm pretty stoked to see this thing come in. All right, let me back out of here. Working with high-tech computer switchers now. I get to be creative with my switcheroo. All right, as far as the used stuff, I'm using something a little different today for used. I'm using the Aputure MC lights that you see all around me right now. I've got a light under here. It's white. I've got some lights behind me here, the bluer color, and these lights are all controlled by my phone. So I could literally right here, sit here and change these lights to any color I want them to be. I can move them around. They're just a magnet on the back. You can see I've got a little bit of Velcro on this. I name all of my stuff. This one here is Bill. I got Ted behind here. So they're fun to use. They're super straightforward. Because they're magnet, they would stick to any kind of metal. The Velcro makes this one a little harder to stick with magnet, but you can see it's still holding really well on its own. And being able to control it from my phone gives me the creativity to sit at my station, literally pull my phone out, choose whatever color I want it to be. In fact, you know what? I don't really even need this teleprompter right now. Let me show you how this works. I'm going to open up the Sidus Link app. It's pretty straightforward. And you can see I can turn them off right now. I can go into, I guess I've got TED by the TV over there. Let's change TED to a red color. Open up that and make them red. So now you can see this side over here is red. This side over here is blue. I can make it blue again. I can adjust the brightness right from here. So I'm only controlling the one light, as you see. And I think it's a lot of fun. And being able to control these things when you're doing a live production is a really handy thing. If one dies, you'll see it right away. Another really great feature with these is the ability to power them off of a battery. So if you have one of these little portable batteries, you just plug it into USB and that'll run forever. Well, at least until this thing dies, which is hours and hours and hours upon hours. Let's see if I can, there we go. Just magnets to the back, pop it on there. Easy peasy. Hey, my brother's watching. Steve, do they have excellent adventures? Bill and Ted? Yes, they do. They have excellent adventures all over the place. They've been to Algonquin. They've been here at the store. They've been home. Steve, you don't even understand the adventures my lights have been on. I don't know where I'm going with that. Anyway, let's get back to the conversation. So new would be the lens. Used would be these really cool features that are used in all kinds of production. One other really cool thing that they do is you can turn them into cop car mode. In fact, I can choose all the fixtures at the same time, all fixtures. I can then turn them all on, and I can make them all party lights or police car. Make it look like we're having something crazy going on here. Oh, that's really dim, and there we go. Change the color schemes, make them red and blue, or make them whatever I want them to be. So being able to control them right here on the phone is a real game changer. Now, of course, I'm going to have to put them all back. So let's go to my TV. I've grouped these two behind me in the TV section, which I can then just hit one button, and now they are all the same color and the same brightness. And then I can go back to Bill over here. Yeah, Ted's back there. Ted's on the TV. Bill's over here. That's how I remember. And I can make Bill white, or even better, I can make Bill proper daylight, which makes it look nice and warm or cool and very nice for what I was trying to do here today. So those are what's used. All right, let's move on to the meat and potatoes of our conversation today. We're going to talk about macro photography. Macro is a lot of fun. What macro is and what people think macro is are two different things altogether. Everybody thinks macro is literally just a close focus of something, when in fact macro is kind of well, the only real macro, I guess you can say, would be a 1-to-1 ratio. Anything 1-to-1 or more is macro. So if it's life size or more so, you're actually dealing with a macro lens. And since spring is here and the universe beneath our feet is waking up and you're getting all these really cool things to photograph, I thought macro would be a great place to start. It's a really good way to see all the detail of the world, super fine details. Because you're creating this 1-to-1 ratio, you're able to have incredible detail on something that's super small. You ever take a picture of a bug's eye, you'll see all those little details. Well, I'm going to show you something that a friend of mine does. Actually, here, let's not look at a friend of mine. Let's look directly at the stuff that I've done with macro. Here we are. So the first shot here is from one of my workshops that I ran, liquid art session, and you can see on the back of the screen, it's really, really sharp detail of that little water droplet. You get some incredible details in a macro image taken with a macro lens. The sharpness is very vivid, very sharp on the edges. The sides of it are just as sharp as the center. And you're getting this detail that you just wouldn't normally see with a normal lens. And to give you a better idea of what a real master can do with a macro, I'm going to look at some snowflakes that our friend Don Komarechka made. The detail you get on these is ridiculous because he's, first of all, using a much more than 1-to-1 ratio. He's actually using like a 6-to-1 or ratio, or 1 to 6, I should say, making things 6 times life size. Making them bigger than life size, you're seeing incredible detail. And he's also using very high resolution cameras, stacking up to 100 pictures into one single image to create this snowflake that you see here. The detail is insane, and I highly recommend, if you're interested in this kind of thing, you check out doncom.ca. That's DONKOM.ca, and check out Don Komarechka's Snowflake and other amazing photography. I'm going to hang on just 1 second. So there we are. Okay, so getting into macro, creating that larger size, you need a special lens to do stuff like that. Also, lighting is very important. If I'm shooting a 1 centimeter fly and I'm projecting that image, I can make it bigger or I can make it smaller. A lot of lenses that you look at are big on one side. As you see on the front here, this is larger on one side and smaller on the other. This is taking a lot of light and making it small. It's not macro. Other lenses will take light or a telephoto where it would be small on one end and a little bit bigger on the other end. It's making things bigger. A macro is usually the same size on the front and the back of the lens, the same size opening on both ends. So the light travels through and it keeps it the same size. This particular lens, though, is one of those lenses that claims it's a macro. This is my old 24-85 Nikon D lens. It is a great lens. I use this for all of my light painting photography and a lot of really good detailed stuff. Having that kind of detail, and you might see some of the light painting pictures that I shot on behind me here from time to time. Having that detail that this gives is great, but it's a 1-to-2 ratio. It's not a 1-to-1. So it's not making things twice as big, it's making things half as big. And by going to that smaller size, what this guy does, why it's called macro, is I can zoom into 85 millimeters and I can focus this closely on things to the microphone. That gives me a very good benefit for shallow depth of field, being very close. It has a fairly open aperture, f4, which gives me very shallow depth of field. So all of my light painting photos, even though I'm very close to them when I'm photographing, I can see wide at 24, I can zoom into a detail at 85, and I can control all of those things even from a very close distance. So I highly recommend that if you're getting into macro photography, don't just limit yourself to looking at a true macro lens, like the 100 millimeter. Actually, Juan, would you mind bringing over that 100? I forgot to bring it over. The Canon 100. I'll show you what that macro lens looks like. Whether it's something like that, a true macro lens, or it's a lens that gives you a macro effect, both of them are a lot of fun. Thank you. So this right here is a true macro lens, and you'll see the front glass is the same size as the back glass. Just light travels right through it. Now with any lens, a macro lens, if I'm focusing on something farther away, you'll see the aperture change. It says it's a 2.8 aperture, but where it focuses is actually going to change that aperture. So the further away, I think the smaller it gets, and the closer you are, the wider it can get. So if you're using a macro lens that says it's a 2.8 and you can't make it go to 2.8, it's likely because you're focusing a bit far away from something. Another really cool thing about the macro is because that detail is so fine, the more pixels you have on your camera, the more you can crop in after the fact as well. So having a high resolution camera, like maybe this Nikon Z7 II, 47 megapixel camera, we have an open box model here. It's actually supposed to be $3,500, selling for $3,150 right now. So that's about $450 off this guy. Just because it's open box, still full warranty and everything. But high resolution gives you that extreme detail that you can crop and crop and crop and see all the little details of a bug's eye or something like that. Yeah, Mike says that Don Komarechka was the president of the Barry Camera Club. He was actually a good friend of mine. I ran workshops with Don. He was a member of the Barry, or the president of the Barry Camera Club. And now he's living in Bulgaria, and he's using his photography to raise money for Ukrainian refugees and really amazing things. So Don is a great guy. I highly support him, and I recommend everybody does. Okay, so as far as the macro goes, let's see here. Other really good accessories to help you with macro photography would be flash. Having a flash and giving you sharpness is so important. You're able to do handheld photos when you're using flash of bugs and really crazy things. For example, another person that I met through this world of photography is a gentleman named Andreas Moline. Now, Andreas was a guest of ours on our podcast, the Expressions podcast, with myself and Aurora. And he actually had these photos that were blowing my mind. The sharpness and the detail. And I mean, to me, it looked a lot like Don's imagery, except he's doing all this in a single image, handheld, at night, under the canopy of a jungle. He's out there doing all this handheld with like an assistant holding a leaf as he's looking at this bug underneath it. And the stories were incredible. His photography is great. And again, his name is Andreas Moline, M-O-Line. Does great work. But that's where you go when you start getting into this high level of macro photography. You're using flash, you're using light to give you that detail in the bug's eyes that you see right there. You don't get that otherwise. So having that ability to add the light in there and get that exactly where you need it is a huge, huge plus. There's macro ring flashes. There's wireless ring flashes that you can remove from the front of your lens. You can mount them right on your lens. You can get a pure ring. You can even just go remote with a flash and a receiver and hold the flash where you need it to go when you're shooting. So I highly recommend, if you're getting into macro and you want that extreme detail, add light to your situation. Maybe use a tripod, give yourself some stability. Some tripods, the arm even goes up in horizontal, so you can get it really low and get some cool angles on stuff like that. So macro photography, what you're going to do with it is all that really matters. Please pick up a camera, get a macro lens on there. And again, it's not just close focus, it's specifically creating a 1-to-1 ratio. At any point on the lens, there's an indicator that's going to say 1-to-1, 1-to-2, 1-to-3, 1-to-4, 1-to-5, and so on. And that's dependent on where it focuses. If you want to maintain 1-to-1, lock your focus to manual. Set that focus ring at 1-to-1 and physically move yourself back and forth to get your focus on your subject. The focal length of the lens will determine your standoff distance, meaning a 30mm lens is great for taking pictures of the little details right here where I'm literally right in front of the microphone. Or a 100mm or greater would be good if I'm taking a picture of a bee or something that you don't want to be really close to. I can have a bit of a standoff. Oops, I fall and die. A bit of a standoff distance here so I can get away from that subject. Of course, if you're taking a picture of a pit viper or something like that, you'll want a 5,000mm lens so you can be in the next county and not worry about getting killed by the snake. I hate snakes. Anywho, that is pretty much that on there. I would love to hear from you folks what you think about macro photography. What do you make photos of? What kind of lenses have you used? Do you have somebody that's inspired you to make better macro photos? I'd love to hear some of that. So let's open up the conversation. We have a few people watching. Robin says, oh, we need trigger warnings for bugs. Yeah, ooh, sorry about that, Robin. Andreas, that's kind of his bag. It's all bug stuff. Studio lights, even dollar store flashlights can work too. That's a really great point. I always have a little flashlight on me, always. So having a little flashlight is a huge key asset as well. If you're out taking pictures, you can see things. I do a lot of light painting, and I'm using flashlights for all of my light painting. Helps me see where I'm going, helps me light the subject. You've seen all kinds of my pictures flashing behind me here. Some of them are my light painting images. So all things that you can do, use a flashlight. You don't even have to have a flashlight. I mean, you could use, we have these tiny little LEDs that you can buy for $40 or so, and you can just set them in places and use those. Lighting is the key thing. You want to make sure you have good light. If anybody has any questions or comments, please post them in the chat here, and I'll be able to get to that. Otherwise, let's keep on going here. We have some more things to talk about. Hey, Fabian, how's it going, man? I'd like to know what you guys enjoy for macro. Do you shoot bugs? Obviously, Robin doesn't. Are you shooting flowers? Are you shooting leaves? Are you shooting people's eyeballs? I did a workshop with a dental office recently where they're using a macro photography for doing pictures in the teeth, oral and extra oral, all over the place in the mouth to see all that fine detail. The problem with a macro lens is your depth of field becomes so incredibly shallow that you end up having to close aperture. Instead of thinking f8 might give you some good depth, you've got to go to like f36 to get good depth. So that's very important when you're using a macro, is know you're using a macro. It's not the same kind of lens as other lenses. Mike says, what are the best alternative for macro rather than buying a lens, i.e. bellows? You know, that's a really good question. Some people go for other options. You already own a lens. You want to use something different. A bellows is basically a piece that goes behind that you can expand and contract by these little, well, you ever see those things where you blow on a fire, the bellows like that? They expand and contract and blow air. You put bellows on a lens like this, it goes between the camera and body, and it literally will move on a track further and closer away. By doing that, you're allowing your lens to have closer focus. Another way would be the extension tubes. Extension tubes are little tubes with no glass inside that come in 3 different thicknesses. You can either use one or you can stack 2 or 3 together. The more tube you put, the closer focus becomes. I've seen some people with extension tubes on there and they don't know what they're doing. They put too many on, and the focus gets closer and closer and closer to the point where it's actually focusing inside the lens, and you can't get close enough for that to work. So extension tubes take some practice. A lot of times they make your system a manual focus kind of a system, which to me in macro isn't a problem. But Mike, that's a great thing to bring up. Alternatives for taking a lens you already own and getting closer focus, also giving you more of a macro effect. So yeah, bellows, extension tubes, things like that are what I know about. But I was sure if you were to talk to Don Komarechka or Andreas Moline, they would have all these other little tips and tools that you can get into for macro. And I highly recommend reaching out to these guys. They're great guys. And says, now I need another Z lens. Great. Actually, the FTZ adapter on your 105 would work really, really well. The new macro lens for Nikon is about 1.5 pounds lighter than the old one, or a pound at least. So it feels like it's an empty thermos now with how light these things are. So something to think about. If you do upgrade, you're going to get a lot less weight from the mirrorless lens. If you don't upgrade, you can get the FTZ adapter and use the lens you already have. And that applies if you have a mirrorless Canon. You can get an adapter for your old lenses as well. Which do I recommend? Which work with autofocus? Mike says, well, I mean, I'd always recommend the extension tubes because they're very quick and easy, and a bellows can tear and rip and have issues. So I would probably say get extension tubes. And if you are going tubes, I'm going to specifically recommend the brand Kenko, Kenko. It's like the industry standard for extension tubes. They work with autofocus. They give good results, and they're actually well built. We've had some off-brand versions here in the store over the years. They're hit or miss. Sometimes they work, sometimes they didn't. It's like the old SCTV skit with John Candy. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Go back and watch that. Season 2, episode 7. I just found it. I'm excited. Anyway, yeah, so macro is a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun. And as Don says, explore the universe beneath your feet, because this is the time of year where all of the buds are coming up and all of these cool little details are starting to be seen. The bees are going to start coming soon. I highly recommend people grab a lens, grab an extension tube for what you have, grab a macro lens, or just play with close focus and see what you can do. Most lenses have a minimum focus distance that you can't get any closer, so pay attention to that. Some people use a 50 millimeter where it just gives shallow depth of field and think it's a macro. It's not true macro unless it's a life size or larger ratio. So 1:1 or more is true macro. All right, well, if we don't have any other questions, let's move on because it's already 5:27 and we're almost out of time. I just want to remind people that we are issuing a photo challenge. Now, this isn't a photo contest. It's not to say you're better than somebody else. This is a challenge to get people making new images. And that's the key. We don't want to see any pictures from your database. We want a new photo for this challenge. We've already issued this challenge for the past 2 weeks. It's the same challenge. We're going to review the photos May 1st, the first Wednesday show in May is when we're going to talk about these pictures. So you still have time. I'd love to see what you can do for our photo challenge theme, which is, ready? Back to black. Back to black is the photo challenge theme. I would love to see some pictures. We've already had a few come through. We've already had, I think, 3 or 4 pictures submitted for the challenge. Love to see everybody else's shots as well. There's so much you can do for this theme. Maybe, use a solar eclipse photo, or maybe use something for a macro photo. What's this, Mike? You say you can do close-up without macro lens. You can do close-up without macro. Macro, again, doesn't mean close-up. Close-up means being able to focus closely. Macros focus very close on average. Again, the higher the focal length, the less close they're going to focus. So a 35 is closer than a 105. But if I have a 50 mil, its minimum focus distance is 0.45 meters. So it's about just almost 2 feet, 1.75 feet. This will not focus here. I have to be that distance away and it'll focus. And for this lens, that is close focus. So being able to focus closely helps with proximity. Proximity is a major influence on depth of field. So if I focus closer, you'll get more black background blur. Same as if you use your cell phone and you move it close to something, it'll blur. That's about the only way you'll get that blurred background from a cell phone is close. All right, if there are no other questions, I think we're just about done for today. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget, firmware is a very important tool for your digital components. You can update that and learn new tricks. Making sure you're getting a proper lens for macro to do true macro is a huge asset in your photography toolbox. And I highly encourage you folks to come by Henry's and check out some of the stuff we have. We sell used equipment. We can also get a lot of stuff that we don't have in our store. Don't forget, we have 20 locations or so you can come in and we can bring in from other stores. And if you have questions about a specific product, come on by. That's why we have a store, folks. So you can still come in, you can still ask questions, and we can do these kinds of fun shows and maybe spread the word of photography a little bit more. All right, guys, I just want to remind you before I say goodbye, I'm just a guy working in a store. If any of my opinions aren't accurate, let us know. Newmarket@henrys.com. If you have a differing opinion, if you want to have a talk, if you want to chat about things, come on by, send us an email. My email here at the store is brian.weiss@henrys.com. That's Bryan with the Y-N, .weiss@henrys.com. You'll get a hold of me directly. To submit photos for our challenge, send them to newmarket@henrys.com. That way everybody here can see those photos and we can make sure we put them in the proper file folder. And that's about it. And you're welcome. Mike, you're welcome. Thank you for asking questions. Robin, thank you as well. And thank you everybody who's watched today. Really appreciate you taking the time to be with me for this half hour. If you think it should be a longer show, if you have advice on what we should talk about in the future, let me know. This is about you guys. This is about community. And the more I know you want, the more you're going to get what you want. Thanks all so much. And we'll see you all very soon. Bye-bye.